Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So there's a new Spike Lee movie out, BlacKkKlansman, which I was lucky enough to see last night at a preview screening, and it is my duty to tell you about it because it is really, really terrific. So Spike Lee's been a bit off the boil as a director in recent years. He's of course a very fiery, very polemical director, sort of tackles issues of race and social injustice head on. This goes right the way back to his early days of She's Gotta Have It and Do the Right Thing, the latter of which I think might actually be my favourite movie of his. The story of broiling racial tensions over the course of one sweltering day in New York. Brilliant film. I watched that at university for the first time and it didn't leave me. And then, of course, you carry it through these collaborations with Denzel Washington on the likes of Malcolm X and things like Clockers, and also recently into his documentary movies, which have been very, very well acclaimed. But he has gone a bit wobbly in recent years with the utterly redundant likes of the Old Boy remake. Nobody needed or wanted. It was just very, very silly. So it's really, really great to report that BlacKkKlansman absolutely gets him back on top form as a filmmaker. He's really fired up, really engaged, probably the most engaged he has been as a director for a very, very long time. Although the likes of Chirac recently were also similarly acclaimed. So it's based on the true story of Ron Stallworth, who was Colorado Springs' first ever black police officer. Brilliantly played, I have to say, by John David Washington, son of Denzel, obviously, with, as I said, with whom Spike Lee has worked several times before. Having started in the records room, he then gets, as depicted in the film this is, and I think it's important to actually say that because Spike Lee deliberately creates a sort of stylized, almost like manic, exaggerated version of reality in this, and there is a satirical purpose to that. It's not empty-headed. There is a reason for that. But as depicted in the film, Stallworth gets bored of working in the records rooms and ends up becoming a detective. Whilst he is a detective, he spots an advert in the local newspaper advertising for the Ku Klux Klan, bearing in mind this is in the late 70s when the very heightened racial tensions, and he rings up and he pretends to be a white man. And he effectively infiltrates the Klan over the phone. Of course, this presents a problem because he, as a black man, can't go confront the Klan face to face. So what he does is he gets his white partner, Flip Zimmerman, played by Adam Driver, to pose as him during the actual face-to-face meetings with the Klan, and then a sting operation begins. All this is based on real life, although, as I've said, Spike Lee does a deliberately stylized take on these events. And what the movie does quite brilliantly, in the manner of all great Spike Lee movies, is that it's a deliberately contradictory and confrontational experience. It doesn't settle down easily. It almost comes at you en masse in this sort of firestorm of anger and elation, joy and despair. All these different contradictory emotions and all these different visual styles all come flying at you in this sort of blaze of energy. And I think it is quite a messy film, and one could actually make a case for it being structurally shambolic. I mean, it doesn't really go to any great lengths to examine what the psychology of going undercover in the likes of the Ku Klux Klan is like. It doesn't really attempt to get to grips with that in the manner of, say, what something like The Departed would do, in which Leonardo DiCaprio became the mole in Jack Nicholson's gang. But that's not the point of this film. The point of this film is to basically act almost as a state of the union address, as with all of Spike Lee's great timely movies. It's a wake up call, and what it does is the movie has a very, very serious intent. Obviously, it's topped and tailed with footage of race riots, and also interwoven throughout are references to the Hollywood likes of Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation, which, the racist depictions in that are obviously very, very troubling, and it's all the more so for a film critic like me, given that those films are held up as almost as sacred texts. Although Spike Lee obviously famously doesn't see Birth of a Nation as that, because he famously got thrown off his filmmaking course for actually daring to criticise Birth of a Nation. It's a very, very troubling film, and I think he's absolutely right to question that within the context of this film. But what you get is a very polemical film that has a very, very serious intent, that is basically meant to act as a mirror to the very, very troubled times in which we're living in now. But it does so while embracing a love of genre, unashamedly embracing a love of genre. And the movie is very, very entertaining. The movie deliberately riffs on blaxploitation movies. There is a whole conversation in the movie revolving around blaxploitation movies, and who is your favourite actor? Richard Roundtree Pam Grier and so on. And the movie goes for that unashamedly, because what the film realizes is that there is truth in genre. There is truth in embracing a kind of stylistic sensibility, and that by painting this particular story in this way needn't make it disingenuous. In fact, what it does is, by stylizing this film as almost a kind of blaxploitation movie in its own right, it's also a kind of buddy movie as well between Washington and Driver. What that actually does is by adopting that style, it actually empowers the character that Washington is playing. It is a movie that owes its visual and musical style to the classic movies that empowered the African American community in the 1970s, in which it's set. So you have a political movie. You also have a movie that is very, very entertaining and very, very funny. I mean, it's got more belly laughs in this, I have to say, than in most comedies I've seen this year. But it's the way that these various elements are kind of sat against each other, creating, as I said, this very contradictory experience in which you're not quite sure how to feel at certain points. Some points you laugh out loud, and then you actually question what it is you're laughing out loud at. But the very notion of you questioning what you're laughing out loud at is exactly what Spike Lee is getting at. He wants you to think about the nature of the material that's being presented to you, and he wants you to think about the social context in which you are watching this film now, because believe me, so much bad stuff has obviously gone down as by the time this film has come out, that, as I said, this film really does hold a mirror up. And I think it is really, really great to see Spike Lee back on form, and he's found a new groove. And I think with everything that's going on, not just in America but around the world as well at the moment, with increasing feelings of isolationism and racism, one can hope now that he will find new force in his filmmaking, that he won't feel the need to go back and make redundant remakes of classic films like Old Boy. Fingers crossed now that pretty much the world now is providing all the material that he needs to basically getting back to making films like Do the Right Thing, and I think this absolutely gets him back on course. There are some terrific supporting performances that Topher Grace as David Duke, the director of The Klan, who gets utterly sort of skewered and bamboozled in some very, very, very funny and provocative sequences. There's a lovely score by Terence Blanchard that is unashamedly grandiose and operatic, and actually calls to mind, I thought, a lot of the work of John Barry's James Bond scores at points. It's a very, very bold score, and it's placed very forefront of the soundscape. And indeed, that's another bold stylistic choice. It's not a subtle film, but then, who needs subtlety? Who needs subtlety when you're basically trying to wake people up? Sometimes that isn't what's needed. Sometimes people just need, a hit. They need like a blast of energy like this, albeit one that's underscored with real intelligence and real insight. Yes, I really, really enjoyed it. I think it gets Spike Lee back on top form. So it's out in the UK on 24th of August. Anyone who's seen it already, drop me a comment about BlacKkKlansman and indeed any of Spike Lee's other films. And I'll see you soon. Bye.